The jerky is split between my shelter and my food cache, so it's in two places, two different supplies, so that if a bear gets one, I'll still have the other. And every triumph is just, there's no one to see it, to share it. And that's when the camera starts to become your best friend. Good morning, everybody. It's a nice day out in the woods, and we're here to talk about episode 8 of Alone Season 11. Watch the episode first. I'm going to focus in this recap on just the humans, the people, the human aspect of what's going on the show now. There's a lot of talk about the events that take place, the strategies, but I'm always going to focus on the humans themselves. So here we go. First, I'm going to begin this episode, as always, with a nature fact, and this time I'll simply say that the wilderness is harsh. That's it. It's harsh. Nobody that's left in the competition is out there being really careless anymore. Of course, as everyone starves and kind of descends to madness. Now, I would say at this point that this is the beginning of the descent to madness for anyone that's still out there. We've crossed 1 month out there, and you go live in a clump of trees by yourself for 1 month, and you'll definitely find yourself, I think, descending to madness in one way or another. And each of us have our own way that we descend to madness. So no one, though, is being careless about stuff. Everyone has to be really careful. No one's being super duper comfortable. No one's being casual in their approach anymore. It's like I said a couple weeks ago, it's a fine line now, and the wilderness is just harsh. Even though everyone is suffering a little bit, though, I think everyone is still having a good time. I've got a quote from Daniel Boone here that I've always loved. It said, Daniel Boone said after one of his long journeys in Kentucky and Tennessee, he said, "I was happy in the midst of dangers and inconveniences." And I think that's the standout quality I want to mention about the people that are there right now in the Arctic on Alone. Each one of them can be happy in the midst of dangers and inconveniences. And something about the mixture of those two elements, danger and inconvenience, can make you more happy. Here we go. Winter has come now. At some point through this episode, you see just a snowstorm hit, and boom, it just stops. All the fall look, all the browns, and it's just, everything is white. It's not incredibly cold yet, but it feels cold because of that lack of energy, nutrition, and circulation that everybody's feeling because of the diet thing. So, the good thing about snow for everyone, this is all four of us right now, the good thing about snow is that we rush outside and we're like, yay, now we can see animal tracks really easily, hare runs and stuff like this. So, I think that's probably the first thing everyone does is go out and just start looking for hare runs. And I was really blown away and surprised by the lack of hare signs. So the hare population in this general area where we're dropped off is on the decline in some way. And I think that it's like everyone going out in that fresh snow is feeling a little lack of what there should be, just an abundance of hares in an Arctic place like this. I'm going to focus on some elements about the contestants that I just admire. Thinking particularly of moments that I'm going to talk about Dub, and Sarah, William, everybody. There's heroics going on quietly now. And I want to pick out some of those things. I admire about William that William is so, he never has an outrageous reaction. He loses a fish or a big chunk of fish or has to fight off a marten, and he doesn't come back to camp and start cursing everything. He doesn't do that. He's steady. He's calm. And he knows that the only thing to be done is what's next, to do that next thing. And I want to just say that that's what a family needs in a man. A steady man like this. William's children, one day they'll look at this and be like, I'm so grateful that my dad could be that way. William can face these difficulties, these losses, and challenges and stuff like this, and he doesn't explode or erupt. A man like William, his family's very lucky, to have a man that's so steady, rock steady. And I admire that. And I admire about Sarah, her faith. She sits there and she's hungry for sure. And she says, I have no doubt that God will take care of me. Now, someone that's experienced as Sarah, what she's saying also is this: it may not look just like I want or like I expect, but he'll be there. And I admire that about Sarah, because that's what faith is. If we can only be grateful when we're getting the things that we want, that's not faith at all. That's just reaction. You know, I give you something, you react happily, then you're grumpy again. Sarah doesn't have that. Sarah says, I believe God's going to watch out for me anyways. I admire that so much about Sarah. She says, God will watch out for me. And she's hungry as she's saying this. That's faith, and I admire that. I admire that so much. Dub has so much good film in this episode. I'm not going to talk about a lot of the big things that everyone's talking about, although that moose as it walked by the river shore, I was on the edge of my seat, and I just wanted that moose to cut across the river and Dub to get on that thing, just because my hunting instinct was so aroused. That moose is right there. What a close chance. But that moose was on a mission, and here's the deal about calling moose. You don't know what's going on in that moose's life or in that moose's head when you throw out a call. Dub called, and I'm sure that his call, moose call, sounded better than mine. But that moose just turned and looked at him and was like, yeah, but I'm going over here. And you can't manipulate that. You can't stop that from happening. That moose probably smelled a cow that was in heat. And no call can overcome that smell. That smell conquers all. And so he was on a mission, you know. And we can't tell that because we can't smell those wind currents, you know. And so I was just on the edge of my seat. I was so aroused as a hunter, you know. Come, get that thing. So I want to say something that I hope everyone noticed. Dub says, if these pike stop biting, I'm going to have to adapt and figure it out. But he says, but I don't want to have to adapt. And that is so true right now. After being there in the wilderness for a month, what's been working for you, you just hope that it keeps working, that it keeps going. You know you can adapt, but figuring it out all over again takes a lot of energy and a lot of potential wasted effort. And Dub is just saying, I don't want to have to go through that again. I've been here long enough that I would like to just keep going with what I'm doing. So I just love that line. He said, I don't want to have to adapt. That's a good way to describe the feeling right now out there. I don't want to have to adapt, change what I'm doing. I just want to be okay. And Dub is okay. He keeps catching those fish. So I believe that the things Dub says in this episode sum up alone better than anything I've seen on screen so far. Dub starts off by saying that he trusts nature more than humans. And I echo that sentiment, you know. And he says, you know, if you're alone, you can be lonely, you know, and it can suck, but at least you know you're not going to have sudden heartbreak. And that's such an accurate description. But then he goes into more like what it would be like to continue on alone. And he says something now this line sums up alone, the struggle of alone, better than anything you'll probably hear in the show, series past or future. Dub says, there comes a point when nothing means anything. And you say, how could that be? Because when these contestants get out there, they're like, this means the most to me of anything. This is my dream. You know, how can you get to a point where nothing means anything? And it is that aspect of being alone, because I fully believe that once your own soul is full, then no success means anything unless it's shared. And no triumph means anything unless there's someone to experience it with you. And Dub says these things and just tore my heart out, because firstly, I'm feeling the same there. All the triumphs, all the successes that we can experience. There's nothing, you know. I'm full. I'm happy, you know. And every triumph is just, there's no one to see it, to share it. And that's when the camera starts to become your best friend. Because that's your only chance to include another human in the experience and triumphs that you're having, is through the lens of that camera. And at this point, I'm thinking about my 2 little boys, you know, and my wife. And I say, everything that I do, there's at least potential that they could see this, share it, and rejoice in it with me. And without that, Dub is right. Nothing means anything. You've seen people in past seasons go on like a powerhouse and then get to a point where they just say, I'm done. I think most of the time this is the point that they've reached. This is what they're feeling, is that, yes, I can do this. I can succeed. I can thrive. But it means nothing without those other humans that make up my world. Because after all, what we are as humans is memory, experience, and stories. And for that to be contained and limited only to your own brain is excruciating. It's the eternal part of us crying out, wanting to touch eternity a little bit through someone else's memory and longevity and experience, to share it. And I just was so tore up sitting there watching Dub say these things, like knowing the feeling of it and knowing Dub, loving that dude so much, and just hearing what he was saying. It was eloquent. It was the struggle of alone embodied in just a few sentences. That was the top moment of this episode. When Dub said those things, that was the top moment. And right after he says those things, he hangs 3 fish up on his shelter, and he lists the people that he cares about, that he wants to experience with. And he says, listen, y'all, I'm doing this. And after all, as we go through our life, it is what we need. As we triumph, as we struggle, as we power through, we need lives and hearts around us, and we say, I'm doing this. And we need to hold someone else and say, you're doing this. That's what it means to be a human. So that goes to me. The show skips around a lot between people, but I've just consolidated it person by person. And when it gets to me, I'm first impressed by how skinny I still am. Now, I'm picking up energy from before. I think episode 6, I was just looked and acted like a skeleton, but I'm picking up energy, but I'm still really thin, really skinny. And sitting on my couch looking at it, I think, Timber, you might be over-rationing. Now, this is a difficult one for me because I grew up in a really poor family. I grew up with almost nothing. And so I have a strong compulsion in me to save, ration. And it was a balancing act out there trying to figure out how much to do. And at this point, I have loads of food, months worth of food to eat, jerky and fish. Side note, when I put those stringers out in the water, you'll hear me mention that these stringers have been working well for me. And that means ever since I finished smoking the moose, I've been fishing and catching fish like this. Sometimes I'd have 4 big fish out there on the stringers and have 2 butchered up at one time. And the reason I'm doing this is because it hasn't been cold enough yet to take those fish out of the water and for them to just freeze and keep and to trust it that they won't spoil. But now suddenly it is cold enough because winter's here. And so I start whacking them and stacking them, especially after I lose that fish. I say, I'm not going to do this again. I pull them out of the water and I just start whacking them and putting them in my food cache. And I stack up a pretty good number of fish in my food cache. Oh, I want to mention the bait that I'm using. When I hold up that first pike, you'll see something on the edge of the pike's mouth. And that is pike's stomach. Now, all along, I've saved all the guts from all the pike that I've caught. I've saved that stomach. And I'll just stick it in holes and caches. And I chopped open pieces of wood, hollowed them out, and put the guts in there, put them back together so I could keep those. And as the winter begins, I'm breaking those open, and still hooking those on hooks. And that pike stomach is what's working the best for me to catch more pike with. Now, that fish that I lose, I was pretty bummed about. I was bumming hard because I had a lot of food, but I know the fish will stop biting as the ice comes. Now is my chance to stack up fish, so that's what the momentum was for me to be trying hard and bummed out when I lost that enormous fish. That was a big fish. I'm really bummed when I lose it because I really want to stack up as much meat as I can before the fish stop biting and ice starts to form. So I was really bummed. And then I just had this notion. If I ask God, I'll get that fish back. Now, listen, there's 0 chance of finding this fish because it's been gone for hours. Overnight, there's a current in that river. It's wide and deep. The fish is big, And if I were to see it, it would surely be out of reach out there in the middle. But I look for hours, look for that stick floating around, don't find anything. And on my main stretch of river right in front of my camp where I have that fillet table set up and all that, I'm walking and I just think, I'll just ask God. And I looked up and I said, God, if that fish is on that string in the river, it'll die, it'll be wasted, but I won't waste it. I'll eat it if you'll give it back to me. And almost immediately, I looked and that stringer pole came up to the surface of the water. And we begin right there. I say, guys, you'll never believe this. And I reach out there, get that stringer pole, haul that fish in. And I say, this is a big day for me. The reason is because this is the fish that I caught twice. I'm convinced that I wouldn't have found the fish again, that I wouldn't have gotten it back, but God gave the fish back to me. I'm convinced of it. So the cache that I'm building takes a lot of load off of my mind, just to have a little bit of peace that I'll not have to struggle to keep my food every day. With that moose hide liner in there, my hope was that the flesh and fat still on the outside of the hide, mice would come up against it and chew, and think that they were getting everything, and that inside of that on the hair, I could stack up all of my meat. And that's what I did, and it seems to be working awesome. Now, that lid, mice can get into tiny, tiny holes, and they can get everywhere. That's why those lid pieces, I shaved the edges of those like boards so that they would fit perfectly with one another, so that there'd be no hole bigger than this, a gap about this big, let's say 1/4 inch or less was the maximum gap at any point in that lid. And that took a lot of work to get that. But I'm convinced that that was important to keep mice from getting in there. Mink couldn't get in there, martins couldn't get in there, mice couldn't get in there. And it remains to be seen whether or not a bear could get in there. But that's pretty much just took a big load off my mind. So when I put fish in that cache, my dried jerky is here, but I'm not putting fish in there dripping on that dried jerky. The fish are frozen. You pull the fish out of the water, and all the water on the outside of that fish freezes almost immediately. So it's dry, it's stable, and I put it in there with the jerky, so it's not going to make the jerky mold or spoil. That brings us to the last thing, which is my shelter. And I've been cooking outside. It's a rule. The production crew tells you you've got to cook a distance away from your shelter, and it's smart because it's grizzly country. But there comes a point in time when you think that the grizzlies are probably in hibernation now, and you really need to cook inside, and that's why I bring my fire inside at that point. I've prepared a fireplace in there, and nothing's working out very well. My smoke hole in the end, it's not venting properly, so I open up another smoke hole in the other end. I open up a smoke hole in the roof. I work for a few hours before I stand there and I say, I'm not sure what to do about this. It's a big problem. The smoke is a big problem, and it scares me because when it's 40 below zero, you want to be burning a fire inside to keep yourself warm. So that's where the episode leaves me, is being kind of alarmed about this problem, and we'll see what happens. We'll see how that transpires. But I'm glad to have shared this week of Alone with you, and I'm glad especially for you to have heard those incredible words that Dub said that sum up the struggle of alone so well. Okay, I'm just back here to do a quick follow-up note on this video before I publish it. I've evidently got to add this. The moose meat. A friend alerted me about a lot of discussion going on about it's impossible to smoke an entire moose before it spoils. It's impossible to process an entire moose up into that many strips. We guarantee that his moose spoiled. Let me set your minds at rest. Let me set the record straight. It's not impossible. The moose did not spoil. I'm going to go over the moose meat. Evidently, I didn't film much of the jerky afterwards, and that bothers people. Chewing on jerky, it's not really what you want to film, And if you're editors, that's not really what you want to present on screen. So if you're bothered by it, the moose, I hauled the entire thing back to camp, and it took 6 days. That's how long it takes. I took 6 days. That's why I needed the cool cache to keep it cool for those 6 days. And at the end of the 6 days, everything was done. It was preserved, but I saved out 15 pounds of fresh meat and fat so that I could eat on it, keep eating on it fresh until it went bad. That was down to a few more handfuls when it did start to turn. And with those few handfuls of meat, I used it for bait and caught pike. So that's how I know that I was pushing the time. The meat would have spoiled soon if it hadn't gotten all smoked. For the naysayers, I don't know what to tell you. You can keep believing that it's impossible. Maybe you can't smoke a moose, but it can be done. I don't want to get too detailed in picking out all the different discussions that are going on about it. There's some ones that really bother me. That I will say that was my greatest trial and struggle, and my greatest victory was preserving all that meat before it went to waste, before it spoiled. If we never see huge stacks of jerky on screen, I don't know what to tell you. But that's my quick add-on to this video before I let it go. I have got to address that because we're not seeing stacks of jerky. The jerky is split between my shelter and my food cache, so it's in two places, two different supplies, so that if a bear gets one, I'll still have the other. And I'm not filming much chewing on jerky. All right. Love you guys.